Hello, welcome if you're just joining. We've just opened the doors to the seminar. So do put your name in the chat. Say where you are today. Um, say hello, especially if I know you, because it's not always super personal in these sessions, but it would be nice for me to know who's there. Um, so do put messages in the chat while we're just giving people, as usual, 2 to 3 minutes to come in before we get started. I hope you can hear me. I know it might not be the most amazing audio through my headset, but I do need to wear it today because it's been a bit flaky, the audio on my computer without it over the last few days when I've been doing training. So yeah, do put a message in the chat. I'm having a look. The audio is a bit low. Okay. I don't think that's because you're in Belgium. and thank you for the hug and the hot chocolate. I'll try and just speak up a little bit. Is that a bit better? Brilliant. Thanks, Ollie. Um, that was me just probably not being energetic enough with my speaking. I can do better. Hi, Anna, Portugal. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic, Ati. Do do keep letting us know where you're coming to us from. This is looking like a really super international attendance today, so that's really fab and exciting. And we will get started in the next 2 minutes. Yeah, great. Welcome if you're just coming in. Oh, at the seaside, lovely. Fantastic. I hope it's sunny. It's sunny here today, actually. I'm coming to you from Cambridge, just outside. Oh, from the Far East. Wow. I don't think you mean the Far East of England, are you? Because otherwise you'd be quite near me, Barbara. Wow. Fantastic. Okay, one more minute and we will get started. Oh, good. Hi, Kirsten. Okay. Right. I think we will get started. Welcome to everybody. Ayin hamukoi kachun iyapayaki chispach. Or as I hope you will be able to hear, because I've put the audio in from my Quechua teacher who says it much better than me. It's welcome to everyone. Hopefully you can hear him. Well, I can't actually hear him. Oh.
Ayin hamukuy kachun llapallaykichispaj.
Ayin hamukuin kachun iyapayaki. Okay, so that means bienvenidos a todos. Welcome to everyone, and let's get started on our theme for today. So, really good to be with you, and I want to share with you first a quote from Dr. Ira Gandolfi, who was leading a session that I was in several months ago at the University of Cambridge that was about decolonising the primary curriculum. And she started off by saying curriculum design is first and foremost an intellectual enterprise. And that just struck me as interesting. I wrote it down, and I've thought since about why that made me feel upbeat. And I guess it's because from the word intellectual, I get this sense of challenge, no easy answers, a kind of not a puzzle exactly, but definitely there's something to do, something meaningful and meaty to look at, but also something inherently very interesting. And then from enterprise, I get these notions of creativity, collaboration, an endeavor that's going to involve more than one person, but also something that ultimately will be a project that bears fruit, that will be productive, that will be of use to people. So that I'm sharing that statement with you because that's how that made me feel when we started looking at the theme of decolonisation and diversification in the primary curriculum. She went on to say that we need to answer in curriculum design, we're answering essentially these three questions: what, how, and why, and not necessarily in that order. So I'm going to start with why. So why decolonize and diversify? Well, we have curriculum expectations in this country. So we have an inspectorate, Ofsted, that evaluates our schools on how well they promote the SMSC agenda, so spiritual, moral, social, cultural. And schools are meant to provide opportunities for their students to explore their own values, beliefs, and identities, and to appreciate the diversity of cultures and beliefs in society at large. It's also a decision when we want to diversify and decolonize. It's also a decision towards social justice. It's arguing for an aim to be equally representative of the multitude of voices that shape our world and that we're teaching about. So looking more broadly outwards. And then it's also, I think, about allowing our students, the ones that we have in front of us, to develop coherent identities. And to do that, I think we have to ensure that we give all of them equally the opportunity to see themselves reflected in the lesson content that we teach, as well as to understand and appreciate others who are different from them. So that means looking more broadly, but when we look inwards at our classroom, at those that we're teaching. And ultimately, I think it's about leading our students towards a more critical, whilst also empathetic understanding of the world around them. So our lessons should enable them to question anything that's too facile in terms of an explanation, and anything that's too partial in its representation. And we know obviously that there are lots of places where they can get very partial and nuanced representations, including in our own teaching, because we are all subject to unconscious bias and conscious bias at times. So all in all, this is the driver of this has got to be a drive towards inclusion. And I was thinking a little bit about that. I was thinking that if it's a drive for inclusivity on all levels, it's also maybe about ensuring that our subject itself, learning languages, language learning, is inclusive and doesn't make some feel excluded from it as learners, like they can't be a linguist, for example, because of how we present the subject or how we unconsciously allow it to continue to be presented. You know, do any of these stereotypes about language and language learning permeate our classrooms? I think it's hard to avoid them sometimes. Do we challenge them either explicitly or in the way we teach and how we plan? So, you know, this is a criticism leveled at our subject. It's an identity that it has. Language learning is hard in the classroom, and does that not exclude anyone who isn't academic? Languages are boring. Does that exclude anyone who isn't nerdy? Languages are for girls. Does that exclude anyone who isn't female? Languages are fixed, unchanging, essentially relics of a past age. They're immutable. Does that exclude anyone who sees themselves as creative and dynamic in their approach to learning? Languages are binary very often, the ones that we typically teach in England, in our classrooms anyway, and gendered. And does that exclude anyone who is non-binary? So just a starter for 10, really, that if we're thinking about the broadest possible interpretation here of inclusivity, then that also includes putting our own subject under the microscope and thinking about how it's presented and how it comes across to learners, and whether they feel that they can be part of it, whether they feel that they can be a linguist. Okay, so if you teach in England, you know that we have a brand new examination. We have a brand new GCSE to teach from September next year, 2024. It has a few things to say about diversity and inclusion. I'm not going to dwell a lot on these, but I'm just going to share them with you on screen and briefly say that I think, to my mind, they're strong enough to make the awarding organizations, the examination organizations, and teachers and publishers think really carefully about how we should incorporate them into our materials and schemes of work. But they're not so prescriptive as to limit the scope of what is included, which to my mind feels important when we're thinking about inclusivity and diversity. Okay, so unfortunately, I conclude that this presentation is a bit misleadingly titled, because however great our efforts are already and can be to increase inclusion and representation and bring to the center marginal voices, that isn't the same as decolonising your curriculum. Muldoon essentially sets us the challenge. It can mean different things, but at its heart, it includes this fundamental reconsideration of who is teaching. Well, you know, at the moment, that's me with all of my background and all of my upbringing. What the subject matter is, well, essentially, that's still French, German, and Spanish in this country largely, and how it's being taught. So we obviously have things that are in our powers and things that aren't in our powers, and ultimately decolonisation, for that to be realized properly, it does need to be further reaching than what I can show to you we've done so far in our thinking about teaching and learning. And that's the elephant in the room, I guess, because this is, with everything that is a really long, difficult process, there are dangers along the way, and a principal danger is tokenism. That if we move away from Eurocentricity of content in terms of our topics and themes, or even our texts themselves, that may still keep our changes at quite a superficial level, and we will fall short of the fundamental reconsideration that Muldoon is suggesting. And when we look at the fundamentals of our subject, even the name of it, modern foreign languages, which is how we call it in an educational sector in England, that is problematic, because the term modern has its connotations with European colonial modernity that started with Columbus. So meaning that actually real decolonisation of the languages curriculum would eventually lead us to question the languages that we're choosing to teach, currently predominantly, as I said, French, German, and Spanish, which of course are world languages now, but as a result of what? As a result precisely of empire building. So there is this need, and there are calls for essentially a reorientation of the curriculum towards languages that have been marginalized and are still continue to be marginalized, and towards nurturing speakers of those languages, whether they're heritage, native, or actually communities of interest, which means starting those languages as a non-native speaker to learn them, giving them a prominence in the curriculum, and those languages that haven't enjoyed that resourcing and that prominence up to now. So should a fear that we're doing too little, too cosmetically, stop us starting with this, stop us doing anything at all? And I think it's probably, well, I think it's surely preferable to make a start, humbly acknowledging that it is just that, it's a start, but with a firm commitment to keep going with it and making progress little by little, going as far as we can. And when I started thinking about this, you know, step by step, little by little, I was reminded of one example that might be seen in that vein, which is my school's International Talent Evening, where students who speak a language other than English at home, or who speak more than one language at home, are invited to present a short reading, a poem, or a song, or to bring an instrument or a dance to the venue, and we have a performance on an evening, and if they are reading, the language text is projected with an English translation as well, so that the audience can follow along as they listen. And we use this in the first term of year 7 to bring parents in, to bring them together, to celebrate the rich diversity of our student population, because we have in this tiny, small rural village in Cambridgeshire more than 50 languages spoken. And we intersperse these performances with our new year 7s doing their Eurovision songs, because that's something that they can bring from their curriculum, as we have the French, German, and Spanish in year 7. It's joyful. The evening is joyful. It's a hit with students and parents. And we've always had a motto for the evening, which is Haba na haba hujaza kibaba. And I'm really embarrassed at this point to admit that up to now, I have always just explained that proverb to the audience in my own voice, even actually using my own rather superficial paraphrased translation. But in preparation for this presentation, I looked for a Swahili speaker who could explain it better. And it literally took me a second to find Abdul Karim, and he has given me permission to share with you his explanation of Haba Nahaba Hujaza Kibaba, which is way better than anything I could share with you. So I'm just going to hope that plays and you can hear any second.
Hi everyone, my name is Abdul Karim and welcome to our lesson today. Today we are going to talk about Swahili proverbs. It is very important to understand that Swahili proverbs or any other proverb in a particular language, they are used to teach, to encourage, to discourage, among many other uses. So with our lessons, I will be sharing with you the Swahili proverb in Swahili, its English translation, its uses, okay? Its uses. How can you use that particular proverb? I will share with you 20 Swahili proverbs in each videos. So in each video, I'll be sharing one proverb until they reach 20, or they can be more than 20, so there can be more videos. Okay, so this is the first video. We are talking about the first Swahili proverb, and that is haba na haba hujaza kibaba. Haba na haba hujaza kibaba. Haba means kidogo. It's a synonym of kidogo. Kidogo is little. Kidogo na kidogo hujaza kibaba. Sawa? Haba na haba hujaza kibaba. It's like little by little, or little fills the measure. Kibaba is an instrument, for measuring something. Like it's approximately 700 grams. It is used to measure. So when you feel things there slowly, eventually it will fill, you know. So this proverb, haba na haba hujaza kibaba, it is used to encourage people to continue doing things consistently without giving up, hoping that there will be results, there will be good results at the end, or they will succeed. So when someone tells you that this thing is it's not getting better, it's just getting maybe low results or what, so tell them with time it will be better. Instead of telling them with time it will be better, tell them haba na haba hujaza kibaba. So they need to be consistent. They don't need to expect a lot of things at once. They need to expect kidogo, sawa? Then eventually they will have huge results. Okay, so Swahili proverbs are called methali, and that is the first one, haba na haba hujaza kibaba. See you in the next lesson. Kwaheri.
Brilliant. So I recommend you follow.
Hi everyone.
Oh, let's move on. I recommend you look him up. Abdul Karim has more Swahili proverbs for you on YouTube. So accepting then that we can get huge results if we go step by step and do little by little. and as much as we can, let's have a look at some ideas for what we can usefully and have been diversifying in the curriculum. And we can start obviously with different aspects of diversity in representation. We can value different standard versions of the languages we teach, including examples of those in different voices, i.e. in the listening material that makes up our lessons. We can ensure that our pictures are representative, that all learners in general can see themselves reflected, but also be accustomed to a wide variety of visual representation of the communities where those languages are spoken that we are studying. And likewise, we can ensure that the stories we share, whether they are non-fiction texts about individuals from the language community or narratives that we have created, that those can step beyond familiar cultural boundaries. So let's take a look at that in some resources to support the teaching of language varieties, first of all, and cultures of different global communities in this culturally responsible way, I guess. And one aspect of that is ensuring that there is a parity in the degree to which the varieties and the communities of speakers are represented in our resources. And the other is taking some responsibility for explaining as well as exemplifying that global spread of these European languages in a way that is accessible to young learners, both in terms of complexity of ideas and the language that we're obviously using to present them. So trying not to shy away from colonization and slavery in recognizing that spread of language across the globe. So we have a commitment to socio-linguistic parity as regards language variation. So in Spanish, for example, we would teach both the ceseo and the ceseo in our Spanish phonics resources. For example, this is an example of one. And generally, I think in published resources at the moment in England, there is a tendency for the Spanish native speakers that provide the audio recordings to be from mainland Spain. In our resources, and I should mention, you can see the letters LDP at the bottom. For anyone that doesn't know, that is language-driven pedagogy. And you can Google it and Google LDP resources, and you will find a portal with all of these resources on there, and lots more besides. But in our resources, we have two voices in Spanish that are represented equally. We have a male speaker from Spain, mainland Spain, and a female speaker from the Canary Islands, who uses ceseo, which for any non-Spanish speakers in the room is the pronunciation of the letters C combined with I, C combined with E, and Z as an S sound, ceseo, and is found in Andalusian, Balearic, and Latin American varieties of Spanish. So we think this is justified, given that the vast majority of native Spanish speakers actually live in Latin America. So this slide here that you're seeing reminds students about the different pronunciations and gives them examples. I won't click on the audio buttons, but there are examples of the pronunciation edificio, edificio, plaza, plaza, and then we go into an activity. In this follow-up activity, the pupils are hearing words pronounced in one way or another, and they have to decide where the speaker is coming from. And this is set in the context of our narrative, where we have a character called Lucia, and her and her family are in Tenerife at a carnival and listening to different voices talking about that in the crowd. And so we would listen and decide.
¿Participas en el carnaval cada año?
So a question there where we've got participas. It's in a sentence, so pupils need to be alert to where it could be a s or a th. And participas was the word, and it was pronounced with a ceseo, so that person is from mainland Spain. Moving on. This is a very different example of year in year 3 Spanish, so much younger learners, we're talking about 7, 8-year-olds, we bring them a Peruvian huayno to sing and enjoy, as is good at that age. We have an authentic voice singing it, which is Jeanette Cabrera, and I've taken this from the mamalista.com website, which, if you don't know it, is an absolute treasure trove of songs and poems from a multitude of different countries. And pupils sing this together. They can see what it means. We talk about we give them different information. We tell them about the huayno, which obviously goes back beyond colonial times. So we're talking about an art form that predates Columbus. But I think what you can see is missing from this learning experience is any sense of what has actually led to the fusion of the huayno art form with the now Christian tradition of Christmas and the Spanish language itself. Now, that needs to come in, but it hasn't made it into this very lovely Christmas lesson for year 3. So you can see here that we've got cultural richness, but without that critical lens of decolonization. And I'm holding up examples of things that don't make it, as well as examples of steps we're trying to take to go a little bit closer. And this is a very lovely teaching moment, but it's not decolonization, as you can see. So far, we've looked at very small steps to include sociolinguistic variation, and that those exist in German as well. We have a German native speaker, an Austrian native speaker in our resources as standard, and we're looking outwards to broader cultural representation. But I think obviously we need to see what else we can do. What can we do that more for wider representation of all kinds, particularly in the communities where the new language is spoken, but they have different heritage. So this is where the curriculum is trying to look outwards, looking for that diversity to reflect with much greater parity the communities that speak the language, whilst at the same time trying to increase students' understanding about how these communities came to speak that language in the first place. So we have a focus in our German curriculum on Migrationshintergrund, so people with a migration background, and there are lots of those living in Germany, and some have 2 or 3 generations behind them now. So Polish, Italian, for example, and others are more recent, like the mass, obviously, million Syrian immigration into Germany. And I think that we want students to know about that. We also very gently want to start probing what those sorts of experiences can be like. Again, always we run the risk of tokenism, but there's only so much curriculum time. So in our narrative, I'm just going to flag up a couple of examples in our mid-year, so our key stage 3, 11 to 14-year-olds German curriculum. We have narrative characters, some of whom have a migrant background. This is Mehmet, who is originally from Turkey, but we portray them as in context in Germany, in Berlin, with their everyday friendships. And here in this particular activity, we are practicing differentiating between the first person singular, this just applies to me, and first person plural, this applies to us, we, to illustrate similarities and differences between children from different backgrounds. So it's quite gentle, and obviously at every point it has a language focus as well, because what pupils are learning is in these interesting themes is also how to communicate in the language. In addition, let's move on. We also focus here, for example, in this activity, on modal verbs, using those to discuss the aims of and challenges faced by immigrant adults and children on arrival to the new country, which is Germany. So it has our activities have a linguistic focus. They're also deeply nestled in these cultural considerations. In terms of production, we often have experiential production activities, asking students to put themselves in the shoes of someone who has quite a different experience from themselves, and to answer in role, so taking on role play, or to provide, as here on the slide, some affective responses to something that they've seen or heard, just to prompt them, to probe them to think a little bit more deeply about the topic. So moving on then, as well as broadening the perspectives to look outwards to the diversity that exists in these target language communities, we also focus inwards on the social diversity and personal identity in our classrooms. And for that, the two key aspects in play are, first, that we want our learning resources to reflect the full range of social diversity in our classroom. So, and that includes different ethnicities, different genders, different social classes, religions, sexualities. And we want our students to have the language they need to be able to communicate about their own personal identities and situations. So to do that, we need to ensure that they know vocabulary and structures that are relevant, inclusive, and up to date, including those that are currently in flux, as languages in flux at the moment, such as the use of gender neutral pronouns. And when it comes to thinking about aspects of gender neutrality, like pronouns, there's a decision in the teacher's mind, there's a decision to be made about when to introduce those into your curriculum. You know, should that be age 11, age 13, age 15, or actually earlier than this at primary school? And, you know, when you don't know, because this is all quite new, then the logical thing to do is ask members of that community with direct experience of gender fluidity, or not fitting the binary mold, to tell you when would be a good time, when would it have been good for you to have seen yourself represented, or to have seen other representations that aren't just the standard. And so the message that came back when we asked this question, as we were designing our primary curriculum, the message that came back was that primary school would actually be the best time to introduce gender diverse representation, visually, but also linguistically, into our resources. So I'm not going to read out those quotes there, but they're there for you to look at. And so we have introduced Leon into our German curriculum. This is Key Stage 2 primary school, and this is here the first slide where we introduce the non-binary pronoun xia. Pupils already know at this point the verb endings for she and he, and here we're introducing xia. You know, there are of course arguments to introduce all three together, perhaps, but we hadn't thought of it by then. So at the point where we've done this curriculum consideration, we've then gone ahead with it here. So they introduce themselves. This is Ronya as well, who uses she. So just even the whole act of asking about which pronouns you use is obviously relatively new, and relatively new in primary languages education, I would suggest. So we have xia is Leon, xia benutzt xia, and then we have Olivia, who is the English pen friend, and she brings information to the class about how xia is essentially the equivalent for they in English usage at the moment. And we continue to use this. This obviously, it is only one of the possible gender neutral pronouns. That's what happens when language is in flux, but it is one that currently seems to, from all the research that we've done, have a significant use. And obviously those things change, and we may have to change with them in time. That's the whole point of it, I think. but we continue to use XIA in Key Stage 3 and 4 resources. And it's just one element of gender neutral language in German. Obviously, we introduce students to other things like the gender Sternchen and ways to avoid being gender specific. So using gerund nouns like die Studierenden. And we have examples of resources that introduce the French gender neutral pronouns as well. Another really big reason for introducing inclusive language is to help students to understand that languages are living. They do evolve to express the thoughts, feelings, and ideas of a community of people, and they therefore grow to acquire new words, whilst other words fall out of use. And maybe that falling out of use is a bit underrepresented in terms of our study. You know, which words are we leaving behind because they express attitudes that we no longer subscribe to? And the whole process of that is very interesting. And I think in later stages of secondary education, it does seem really appropriate to include language itself as the focus of study. I know pupils find this interesting, and it also helps us shed a really important spotlight on unacceptable use of English in our school communities, where we know that people unthinkingly at times use language that really is unacceptable to each other, even if they do it in the name of fun. And we can, as a result of focusing on language in our new language lessons, in our target language lessons, we can encourage all of our students to call out this behavior. And that feels important. Okay, ooh, move on. That was the translations of that. You know, here, for example, this is something you could blink and miss, but it's simply our choice of the they pronoun in the English comprehension questions that differentiates this resource from any other that you might find in a typical textbook. So sometimes it's about very, very small changes. Okay, and at this point, I want to take the opportunity to do a little tiny myth busting moment. I do think that in the wider discussions out there, some are getting quite confused about decolonizing and diversifying, and using it to shore up the age-old and really quite unhelpful binary with boring language elements on one side that are supposedly responsible for the lack of motivation for language learning in England, and the goal of rich emancipatory contexts on the other hand, and holding those up as a fixed binary. And I think that that's quite unimaginative. Actually, I think it's quite lazy thinking, and I don't think it has either an evidence base, nor is it corroborated by what we've seen in England's language classrooms over the last 20 years. I don't know if you're old enough, any of you, to remember the old new national curriculum of 2007, which had a real drive on ditching traditional house and home style topics in favor of borrowing interesting themes from elsewhere. And there was absolutely nothing wrong with this. I was a fully signed up participant in it. It was absolutely right as well, and I stand by it. I absolutely think we should have a whole range of interesting age-appropriate material in our languages curricula. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the decisive factor, because ultimately success in learning is the prime motivator, and it doesn't matter, but any number of engaging topics, whilst important, won't compensate for insecure partial knowledge that doesn't enable our students to communicate, because that is the bit that leads to success, and that is therefore the prime motivator. And you know, we could go even further and say that language itself can be emancipatory and contribute to decolonization. So I'll just let you read that quote there. So Sharon Sodwa-Otu is a British writer and activist. She now lives and works in Berlin. She writes in German and English. I've just discovered her recently, and she also works for the ESD, the Initiative Schwarze Menschen in Deutschland. And, she says this about why she thinks verbs need emphasizing, essentially because it's people's actions that discriminate. And all this to say that thinking carefully, I think thinking carefully, as she does here, about the form and meaning of words themselves can be really powerful in terms of that objective to bring legacies of prejudice and discrimination and marginalization to the fore. And once they're out there, visible in language, they are there to be challenged. Our culture, including the culture of coloniality, is sitting there. It's resting in multiple layers of perspectives and attitudes, and language is what is expressed in. So a detailed exploration of words and their forms and their meanings can really bring this out, maybe as well, if not better, than any other object of study. So I don't really want to start putting decolonization and diversification into a camp of interesting topics which we go for, because we need to neglect the study of language, because I don't believe that binary exists. I think it's unhelpful. So let's look at how we can broaden the knowledge that students gain a little further and a little bit more flexibly as well. So I think the first thing here is the principle of personalization, the need to make room for personalization in learning. So for us in England, having a defined content, knowing what the expectations are in terms of vocabulary at the end of the end of obligatory study, or the end of GCSE at 16, means that course planners and teachers and students can make really good informed choices about building their personal repertoire. They can be encouraged to add words that are important to them, to express their personal meanings that matter, knowing that they'll be able to use them in real life and also gain credit for them in production in the examinations. And it's not necessary for all students to learn the same words. That is exactly what clarification strategies like how do you say that are for. And this means that students' personal lived experience and knowledge can be bespoke to them to a degree. Obviously, there's a core, but the core gives you space to personalize. And I think that can usefully start as early as year 3. It's just an example here where pupils are first of all encouraged very early on to pick their favorite words, to highlight those, to get them noted for their memories. And then a little bit later, I think it's only about 4 weeks later, we teach 2 pets. We teach dog and cat. But pupils are encouraged to think more broadly about a pet they have that's different from that, an animal they'd like to have, and add that to their personal repertoire. That's the kind of thing that can start very, very early on. And then, of course, there are countless examples that we can bring of real life stories to our lessons. So focusing on not just well-known celebrities, but as broad a range of life experience as we have the time to use the internet and find and develop them into teaching resources. Real life is an unlimited resource. And then in our fictional narratives, we can also go beyond these traditional Eurocentric circles of experience. So then the beauty of a narrative, particularly at primary age, is that it can open up doors to this broader cultural and knowledge encounters. So our French primary resources have a family from Lorient in France, with the other half of the family based in Haiti, and also a quirky aunt from Canada. Our Spanish scheme of work has a family also spread across 2 continents, Lugo in Spain and Arequipa in Peru. And what that gives you is a springboard into obviously into culture. So here we have not just we are actually giving Haitian Creole a little bit of room in our lessons. Yes, we're learning French, but actually we're learning about this place and these people too. And we introduce pupils to Haitian Creole in a song initially. Balance Yaya, which is a very well-known folk song in Haiti. It means swing, swing Yaya, who is the name of a girl. You can see that we tell them things which they're probably not going to totally appreciate at this stage. We're not going to then dissect Haitian Creole with them at this point, but they can recognize words that they can recognize, and are not really going to recognize, I think, at this stage, that the grammar is a little bit more like West African languages, so there are no indefinite articles, for example. But nevertheless, it's a starting point. It gives us an introduction. And then we carry on. I'll just go past that. We obviously focus on different traditions from these countries as well. This is the fanal, which is a new tradition,
Noël,
which I had to learn about. And then later we return to the language. So we use the opportunity to bring the languages together in an activity that develops pattern finding and ability to spot patterns between languages. So bonjour, bonjour. Obviously the English word hello being vastly different. Chaque jour, pardon, pardon, etc., etc. And later we do introduce in years 5 and 6, so 10 and 11-year-olds, we do teach pupils a little bit about the Haitian Revolution. This does explain how French came to be a language in Haiti. And we look at this as a precursor to thinking about their national day. So the 1st of January is not just New Year's Day in Haiti, it's also their Independence Day. And we look at how Haitians greet each other on that day, what they say, how similar or different that is from French. And we go a little bit further into it, where we have a language focus here. We're looking at
Ici,
like,
les gens, tout le monde,
I have lots of French
ils célèbrent
embedded in this
tout
resource.
le monde. Bisous.
Okay, so French is embedded in our resources, but here we are also explaining the tradition of what they eat on this day, and why it's so important to the notion of independence and freedom. It's again a baby steps. These are baby steps, and this is not decolonization. This is representative diversity, which is very much step one, and we need to obviously go beyond this. There are moments in our resources in key stage 3 and 4. So we're talking about 13, 14, 15, 16, where we're aiming to create activities that state as clearly and objectively as we can the factual reasons for linguistic diversity. And there's one example here where students hear French sentences about the consequences of the colonial empire, and they have to recognize whether these are in the past, so these are things that have now stopped, or in the present, in which case this is indicating the lasting effects of colonialism. And they listen to those. So a language focus combined here with something coming close to helping students recognize some of these lasting legacies. I'm rushing a little bit now, but looking critically, casting a critical eye at the curricula that I'm currently involved in, I would obviously say that we've managed the first few bullets. We are much broader, both inward and outward facing. The representation is broad, it's diverse, it's looking more inclusive, but there's clear room for development now along the lines of a much more critical reading of some of these legacies, as well as obviously we always have in the back of our minds on reorientating the curriculum. To a large extent, these last two are a little bit out of our control, in that we can't, as one school, do something completely on our own, beyond things that I've shown already, such as the inclusion of more marginalized languages in the curriculum, raising students' awareness, which is valuable, but again, doesn't count as this fundamental reorientation. And we can't ignore the fact that there are benefits to our learners of knowing French, German, and Spanish. So it feels like we're not going to want to take away, we just want to add. In my trust, we've added Mandarin into one of our secondary schools. we're also introducing Arabic extracurricular learning into 2 other schools, but French, German, and Spanish do remain the main curriculum languages. So in my view, it's definitely worth taking concrete, even if baby steps, to diversifying, to broadening inclusivity on all levels, including that idea that I'll go back to, that language learning is for all and all can be linguists. And there's no doubt in my mind that a study of the language itself, the forms and meanings of sounds, words, and structures, can be a very, very important part of that diversification and that inclusivity. And finally, although it's really clear to me there's a long way to go, we can all take some steps to advocate for greater inclusion, diversity, and decolonisation in language teaching. We can champion speakers of heritage languages. We can encourage communities of interest in more marginalised language. And we can model this ourselves in our own experience by stepping beyond familiar boundaries and learning a new language that sits outside of the top 10. And I can really recommend Quechua. I'm just a beginner, but it's a beautiful, rich language, and I'm loving it so far. So, ayin, hamukuy kachun, iyapayaki chispach, although that says bienvenidos a todos. I didn't manage to learn thank you for listening in the time, but thank you for listening, and I hope that it hasn't bothered you too much that I've gone over. Thanks very much. I have been told that I can take questions because they're not going to close this window, but I also know that there are lots and lots of presentations that will have just started that people may need to get to. So I'll just have a quick look in the chat in case anyone's got a question. But otherwise, thank you very much for being with me this afternoon, and I hope it's been of interest. Yeah. Oh. Oh, thank you, Lorenzo. I had understood it was about half, but I'm willing to be corrected on that because I don't have reliable sources. So if you do have a source for that that knowledge that 20% of Haitians, it's only 20% that can speak passable French, please do let me know. Pass that on to me. Okay. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. I can't see any more questions. I'm just browsing the chat. But have a lovely rest of the afternoon. I am speaking again at 4:30 in case anybody is interested in coming to that, about 5 big language learning ideas that have been very influential to me over the last 30 years. So join me if you want to. Otherwise, have a lovely afternoon and rest of the conference. Oh, 3 new messages. Yeah, okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.